Whenever I show my raised beds in my videos, there are two common questions that I get asked the most. And the first, biggest one is, what do I use in the beds to fill them? And the second one is, why this height? Why this size? So I wanted to answer the second one first because it's the easiest one to answer. Now, when I first decided to use these roofing panels, I wondered about the height of them. But once I put them together, they really seemed to me to be the perfect height. And the perfect height being the width of the panels. And so that's why this height actually came out this way, was because this is the width of the panel themselves. Now, as far as bending over, if they were another, I'm 6'2", so if they were another 8-10 inches, it'd be even easier for me. I would just reach the 2 feet and not even have to bend at all. But I think that's an overly lazy way of doing things. So a little bit of bending isn't going to hurt. But another thing too is that if I was to make them higher just for me, well, my wife, she's pretty short. She wouldn't be able to even reach barely into the bed, maybe a foot if she was lucky. So this actually ended up working out to be the perfect height. Even if I went higher, I would even have to come up with a few more yards, or at least a yard or two of more fill, and that just that'd be senseless. Now, as far as the height for vegetables and whatnot, the plants love these beds. The only couple things that may want to be a little bit higher would be the asparagus and the grapes. But they seem to be doing okay. I think they're going down, they're hitting native soil, they're finding more soil to go through, and then they're going into the ground, and they're doing perfectly fine. So they're not mad at me at all for doing that. So these beds, actually, the height is perfect. The width, 4 foot, seemed to be perfect because that's a half of one of these panels, and I can reach in 2 feet, go around to the other side, reach in 2 feet, and I can harvest just fine. So these beds ended up actually being the perfect height. Now, as far as the length goes, that's subjective. You can go any height you want. You can go half of this, quarter of this, you can go 40 feet. Okay, so now let's talk about the number one question that I get whenever I show my raised beds. I always get asked, what do I use for fill? And now the recipe that I'm going to give you is one that has been tried and true by a lot of different people. And specifically people like Walter Green and Joe Lampel and people like that have been using it and promote it. And so I've been using it also for many years, and it works wonderfully for me. Now, it's one of those things where you kind of have to play with it and find out what works best for you, because different vegetables have different needs, and so they're kind of quirky sometimes. Now, when I'm growing, I classify everything in two categories: annual and perennial. Now, there are a lot of subcategories like, acid loving, like blueberries and things like that. But that really has nothing to do with the mix, because they're still either going to be a perennial or an annual. And so I always pick my base depending on just those two categories, annual or perennial. Now, the annual, of course, man, that wind's whipping. I hope it's not coming out on the microphone. Now, an annual, of course, is something that you grow, and then it's done for the season, you pull it out, and then you replant again in the fall or in the spring. And so basically there's a period of time where there's nothing in the bed. It's completely empty, and it allows you to amend it and top dress and things like that. And so it gives you more flexibility when it comes to putting more nutrients in the bed. Now, the perennial is one, of course, that stays in the soil, like the rhubarb and the asparagus and stuff like that. So also like my grapes, I showed that in my onion video, where the bed had sunk down over a foot, because I had put way too much compost in that mix. And so you're going to have to be conscious of that and then adjust it accordingly. And so when that happens, then you've got to do something. You can't just throw more in and then expect the plants to just jump up, on top of the soil and say, oh, good, I've got, they stay where they are. And then you can't bury them. So you have to be careful. Now, every bed is going to sink, because whenever you have decomposing matter, compost, it's going to get taken up. It's going to get used. It's going to sink. And so, but at the rate at which it sinks, you can slow that down by adjusting the base. And the base that I use for both annual and perennial is made up of topsoil and compost. Now for annuals, I try to use about 80% of those two. So 50% topsoil and 30% compost. That makes up my base for the annuals. For the perennials, I adjust the topsoil to go up quite a bit more, sometimes up to 65% or so, sometimes even 70%. Like the blueberries and things like that, they're going to be there for years and years. And so the way that, now a lot of people say, well, how's it getting its nutrients if you're not adding more compost? Well, then the challenge is you're going to have to mulch a lot more and side dress a lot more, which that's just the nature of the beast. So now let's go back to the annuals. I've got 50% topsoil and 30% compost. So that's 80%. That leaves me 20%. And of that 20%, I use in 5% increments the following. Now, I pick 4 of these, and I can adjust and compensate by, substituting if I can't get enough of the different ingredients that I have. Now, I try to generate most that I have here on my own, but I just, sometimes when you're doing a big bed like this, you can't. So the number one on the list, I use 5% worm castings. Now, I have substantial worm bins, and I actually created a new worm bin, and I did a video of it, and I'll be uploading that sometime in the future after I get it edited. But so I generate a lot of worm castings. Now, these beds here are a little low. It's about almost 5.5 yards. I think it's like 5.3 or something like that. So if it's 27 cubic feet per cubic yard, that's 27 times 5, which is 135. I'm just doing that off the quick on top of my head. But anyway, so 10% is 13.5, and then you've got, so figure about 7 cubic feet. And usually, if you have to go out and buy it, a lot of times you can get it, like there's a local place here you can get it. It's about $8, I think, or $9 per cubic feet. So that's 8 times figure 7 is $56. So $56 to amend this really 16-foot bed is not too bad. But if you don't generate your own, it can get kind of expensive. So that is 5%. So that brings us up to 85%. And then the next one on the list is mushroom compost. Now, mushroom compost, I don't create it myself. I don't generate it myself. So I have to buy it. And I buy it in bulk. And that ends up being, it's probably about the same cost as the worm castings. There's a lot of controversy around it because people don't know what the mushrooms have been grown in, and so they don't know what the base is. Could it, the people say, well, it could have been treated sawdust from, treated lumber or whatever, and so you kind of have to be careful. The one I get is OMRI certified, and so it's made for use in organic gardens. Okay, so another one on the list is 5% rock dust minerals. Now, I buy the azomite rock dust, and I buy it also in large quantity to fill up big beds like this. And so I don't have experience with all the different brands and different kinds. I just have I use the one that is azomite rock dust, and that's what it's called. And so you're just going to have whatever is available in your area. And so that's 5% more. So now we're up to 95%. Now the last one on the list is composted chicken manure. And I actually grew up raising chickens, and I don't have any right now, and I don't know why I don't. So, but I'm actually getting chickens, and that's going to be in the near future. But for now, whenever I have a big bed like this, I have to bring in some chicken manure. And I get the organic composted. It has to be organic composted. You know, for me, I guess if you don't need it to be organic, that's your own call. But it has to be composted. Now, if you can't, now of those four things, if you can't find all four of them, it's really no big deal. Like a lot of people can't find mushroom compost. Well, that's not that big of a deal. Just, you know, increase the amounts of the other, and then, you know, if you can find something like leaf compost, you know, throw that in, and that'll make a great substitute. If you can't find composted poultry manure or chicken manure, then I'd have no reservations about using composted organic dairy manure if I know that the cows weren't given growth hormones. And you know, you could use horse manure if you know that they were not grazing in fields that were sprayed with chemicals or pesticides, something like that. Then you can go ahead and substitute that. I'd have no reservations about it if I couldn't find chicken manure. However, the chicken manure, in my opinion, is like, I don't know, it's like magic. It's gold. It's like one of the best things you can possibly use in your garden. So we'll talk about the perennial beds now. With the perennials, I try to get the 80 to 85% is the same, but I increase the amount of topsoil as opposed to the compost. The ratio changes. So sometimes I'll even go like 70% topsoil and then 10%, even 15% compost, and that'll leave me 15% that I can use and pick the three. Now when I do that, the three that I use consistently is the rock dust minerals, the composted chicken manure, and the worm castings. And I will leave out the mushroom compost, and they seem to like it, and they haven't screamed at me yet. So increasing that, the amount of topsoil is going to give you a little bit more breathing room, and the beds won't sink so quickly. Now you've got to be careful with topsoil, because too much topsoil creates this like rock hard. Once the sun starts hitting it and it dries and it bakes it, it starts cracking, and it's just your plants are not going to like it. So you do need to amend it. You do need to put in your compost, put in your rock dust and other things. So that is the formula that I use in all of my raised beds now, and it seems to work great. But then again, like I said, you got to play with it. You've got to kind of just adjust it for your own needs, and whatever works best for you. Don't be afraid to try it. Now, your bed, the first year is going to be okay. The second year will be better, the third even better, and as the years go on, your bed just gets better and better and better. And once that symbiotic relationship establishes, your bed will kind of settle in, and it'll just become, it'll just become an incredible growing medium. Now, you're probably going to ask, how do I mix it? Now, I don't typically worry too much about the first half. I mix it, and it's just kind of like, nonchalant, just blah, I do use the same ratios, but I'm not as careful. I just mix it all up. But the top half, I definitely am careful to make sure I mix it in really good. So I'll put the castings in, take a fork, and then dig it through, because it's a new bed. I'm not really disturbing anything. Like, there's no food web going on in here yet, so I'm not afraid to kind of like, my redneck tiller, which is my fork. I just got buzzed by a hummingbird. So I'm not afraid to mix it up and fork it and do it that way. And then I put in one, and then I do the next one, and then I turn it over and get it all mixed in good, and then the last one, and you know what I'm saying. So that's how I do it. Once it's established, I'm going to go ahead and do another video about how I amend the beds in the fall and spring, so that I make sure that I get my beds back up to level. But that's another video for later, but because this isn't going to need, I'm going to be doing probably top dressing and, you know, or side dressing as the summer rolls on, and I'll show that. But for right now, this is what gets the plants established and growing and going off like gangbusters. So that's the method that I use, the ingredients, the recipe that I use for all of my raised beds. And so I hope that answers that fundamental question that really is on a lot of people's minds. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell down there when you hit the subscribe to make sure that you get notifications about whenever I upload a new video. All right? Thanks a lot for watching, guys. We'll catch you later.